Hello, and welcome to another episode of Jason's Lunatic take on comic books. I think it's fair because The Suicide Squad came out officially on HBO Max and in theaters yesterday, and most people would assume it's coming out today. I think that I'm going to talk about the background in the comics. No spoilers to the movies. No. So, uh, I've seen the new movie. That's all I'll say about it. But this new movie, The Suicide Squad and Suicide Squad, it's kind of weird how they're similar yet different. It's like The Suicide Squad versus Suicide Squad, and you hear things. Is it a sequel? Is it a reboot? I have a very definitive answer to that classification, which I will give out next week. That's a cliffhanger. How is Jason going to classify that movie? Next week on Jason's Lunatic Take on comic books. So, let's talk about this original Suicide Squad from the comics, because it was not originally a DC villains as superheroes concept. It actually started out as a fairly generic World War II comic book. I'm a little hazy on the details. I never read any actual Suicide Squad comics per se, but it's like you have a series of sort of cast-offs who are still, they're cast-offs, but they're still heavily enlisted in the military and expected to carry out complex operations, only in the world of propaganda. But anyway, these oddball characters who go on these very difficult missions. They're suicide runs. You're expected to die, hence the name Suicide Squad. It's a more literal name than the DC villains one, Uh, and then this goes on for a while, and then it stops. I mean, it's basically like you got the World War II adventures, and then it fades away as comics became more superhero centric. So I think the tie-in from World War II to DC villains was pretty sloppy. Basically, Amanda Waller is like, "Hey, we used to have this Suicide Squad. What if I just do this entirely different thing where we take the supervillains and we coerce them into working with the government and have contingency plans to kill them if they escape, and just so complicated, but it's just like the other Suicide Squad. I mean, they're suicide missions, sure, but it's so disingenuous to be like, oh, it's just like that one. And is this a thing? Like, you're gonna lose the comic book title, so you have to like retroactively absorb your new idea into that old title, like shoehorn that in, like oh, Justice League went out of publication, but hey, I was gonna do this anyway. My idea about the Supreme Court or superheroes in their spare time, call that Justice League. It's the same thing. That's right. Supreme Court superheroes. Let's go a little side tangent here. We've got the Clown Prince, Brent, the Clown Prince, the Clown Prince, Brett Kavanaugh. And ACB. That's not Amy Coney Barrett. No, she's got a mask on. That's the amazing Coconut Gun Beulah. So anyway, yeah, it's pretty convoluted. Amanda Waller comes into this on the scene, and she's like, "I want to do the Suicide Squad, but this way." And they do a step that the first Suicide Squad film thankfully ignored, which was the process of going to the President of the United States and getting a connection and getting him on board. And they didn't even bother doing like the MCU does, where they had William Sadler play a fictional president in like a couple movies. They actually bothered to draw Ronald Reagan into the Suicide Squad, and it's just such that like time wasting crap. It's like, can I do the Suicide Squad? He's like, well, I'm a little hesitant, but okay. make a joke about the jelly beans or Walter Mondale. I don't know. It's just like, yep, we got to see Reagan, and he's on board, and he has these reservations, but mostly the reservations are like the Suicide Squad does something crazy, like they end up in the Soviet Union in one issue, and then Reagan's like, "What are you guys doing in the Soviet Union? It's crazy," and then that's it. Don't get too distracted by the dynamite Ronald Reagan impression, but yeah. So Anyway, that's a very memorable moment about the early Suicide Squad, but pointless. Someone just wanted to draw Ronald Reagan really badly. Yeah. Anyway, so despite this lengthy introduction, and most of the first issue is just explaining the World War II thing, which we don't have to come back to ever again, so that's weird. But she gets her way, and to tie it into the World War II thing even more, Rick Flag, who was in the movie, the first movie, that's old enough I'm not spoiling it. Anyway, Rick Flag was in the old Suicide Squad, and now he's haranguing the villains on the new Suicide Squad. Why? I don't know. I mean, sure, I guess the continuity of the old Suicide Squad to the new, but Amanda Waller is running a government operation, so she has money, and she's hiring some old World War II guy who somehow is not as old as he would seem. If you're in your 20s in World War II and you're in an 80s comic book, I know comic book characters don't age, but that kind of direct, linear path is just weird. So I guess Rick Flag's a good military man. I feel like there's a lot of good military men who are younger than Rick Flag. So, is that his name? Rick Flag? Let me know in the comments. Comments are just good for general sweeping of my mistakes. So, mistake, put it in the comments. There you go. If I were to compare, I'm going to compare a little bit the comics to the first movie, the David Ayer, in the Ayer, making mediocre movies in the Ayer. Let's compare the comic books to the movies. That movie, not the new one. I'm not spoiling. The David Ayer movie. I've said that a million times already. Okay. Comparison. The comic is a little more direct than the Ayer movie. The pacing is a lot more direct. You have to finish in a 20-page issue, so it ends up looking a lot like a real guerrilla military operation. As much as I would know what that looks like. You go into the jungle and you sneak into the bad guy's place and you do the thing and then you get out. It's not as much cinematic pizzazz as the movie. So the Suicide Squad does in fact end up being a war comic with an occasional aside from smart alecky villains. And to compare it to the David Ayer movie, the roster is just not as sophisticated. They both have Captain Boomerang, but Captain Boomerang wasn't quite as actory in the comics, and there was no Harley Quinn. I don't who was in that Suicide Squad. That would have been a good thing to look up. I think we got the Deadshot, but Deadshot wasn't Will Smith. It was a crusty white guy who was a, no offense, secondary Batman villain. It's very offensive, but my point was, smart alecky villains do not really overpower the war aspect of the comic, despite the DC villains being the main gimmick and the main pitch for the thing. So it's a very uneven read. It's kind of disappointing reading the first, I think it was 2015 issues of John Ostrander's Suicide Squad. It's a fun concept, though. Well drawn. It's aight. So, that gives you a gist of the thing. Let me know in the comments how much you enjoyed my repeating the David Ayer movie thing, and any other questions you had about the Suicide Squad, or updates to the format, or things you want me to talk about on this channel. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you made it this far, I think you're already a big fan. But anyway, to wrap things up, I thought I'd go a little off beat because I don't have a big through line with the Suicide Squad. Most of my knowledge does come from the movies, and I'm not going to talk about the new movie today. So I do a little segue from the Suicide Squad to suicide moments in comics. These are not moments in comics about suicide. It does not involve the act of suicide. This is more moments in comic book history where comic book industry types, titans of the industry, making these big comics, shot themselves in the foot, a little bit of career suicide, so to speak, made these mistakes. It's very loosey-goosey with the facts, like usual. I'm not a journalist. Okay, what was that voice? Okay, top 5 suicide moments in comics. Not literal suicide, career suicide. Man, I repeat myself. Okay, number 5, the New 52. This is the most generic of mine. I'm sure the New 52 has fans. The New 52 still has ramifications across the DC universe, but we all know the story. It's a very capitalistic story, honestly. DC Comics post turn of the century was like, you know what? We're gonna make new versions of everything, and we're gonna make up new things to be new versions of, and make 52 different brand new superheroes. Superman, Batman, 10 spin-offs of Batman, whatever. It's like start from scratch. The origin stories, everything, issue 1. Get people to go out to stores, buy all this stuff. Fresh out the bat, you're getting a number 1. 52 number 1s, which does not dilute the value whatsoever. But yeah, and then it got all it was naturally chaotic. Comic readership has been down for a while because of, you know, there was a lot of saturation in the 80s and 90s. There's a lot of migration to television and other media markets and stuff. So rebooting the canon, it was just already people who were vaguely interested in comic books were already sort of like, well, that's a lot of change, new stuff, that's getting away from the classic stuff I love. So it kind of fell apart. DC was like, whatever, let's kind of do both, classic stuff with new stuff. So it's kind of a flashy moment that didn't go anywhere. Suicide? No. Bad? Maybe. Number 4, the spoiler alert from a 80s comic you probably don't care about. The death of Jason Todd. Nothing's permanent in comic books with death, but at the time, it was Jason Todd was in trouble with the Joker. This is a Death in the Family story arc of Batman. Jason Todd was Robin. I don't know where I am in that sentence, but Joker's gonna kill Jason Todd, maybe. So they did a phone number. Call this number and say, you're gonna kill Jason Todd or not. I read that some people called the number and said you should kill Jason Todd, and said derogatory things about his potential homosexuality, which is not good. That would be career suicide if a executive at DC did it, not a low-life fan, but it's still not a good look. And fans voted to kill Jason Todd. Jason Todd died, and later came back as the Red Hood, but that's a different story. So, nothing that bad happened, I don't think. Fans weren't that attached to Jason Todd. Batman is the draw of Batman. But at the same time, it's just kind of sad. And it's murky. I don't know if it's suicide, but it's definitely an arranged murder. Which is probably, in terms of sins, it's probably better, but only technically. Number 3. The debut of Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy number 15. If you thought the last entry was technically addressing the concept of suicide, this is even ridiculous. So, get this. They're like, we got this character, his name's Spider-Man, let's put him in a comic book and see what it does. And they cancel the comic book after the first issue. And you never heard of Spider-Man again, and he's never had any success. He's not on my shirt. I can't point, there you go. He's not there. No, so this is kind of trick. Amazing Fantasy was a sort of a, I would describe it as it's not a horror comic, but it kind of is. It's like science fiction stories with twists. And they threw in Spider-Man in there, who's not a science fiction story with the same kind of twists. And he was successful, and they gave him Spider-Man number 1 shortly thereafter. But it's kind of weird that their big push for Spider-Man was on a comic they were going to kill. R.I.P. Amazing Fantasy. What a busy title that is. It's not just fantasy. It's got a generic superlative on it. So yeah, that magazine committed seppuku in the name of Spider-Man. Suicide in the name of Spider-Man. And it's a moment. We all know. Number 2. The formation of the Comics Code Authority. Okay, this is like a real heavy one. The most real world one. As you may or may not know, in the 50s, whereabouts, and there was a big trend in comics to do horror comics and exploitation stuff, and it was very successful. very profitable. There was a big surge of creativity, depending on who you ask. The Tales from the Crypt comics of William Gaines and Al Feldstein, something like that. Anyway, EC Comics, and this guy Frederick Wortham, this crazy old loon. I'm sure he looked like an old person at a very young age. He's a very creaky face with glasses, but he's like, those comics. They make you gay, they make you kill people, they make you steal, they make everything bad happen. And he published a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which is just a fantastic title, very subtle. And he published these interviews he did as a psychologist, and get people claiming that these things were true. And there was a lot of public rancor against comic books. So this is actual suicide because the comic book companies felt that government regulation was going to happen. So they said, fuck those guys. We can regulate haphazardly on our own. So they're like, we're going to create something called the Comics Code Authority. Just rolls off the tongue. Even the CCA acronym feels a little busy. But anyway, get the Comics Code Authority, which is going to, arbitrarily look at every comic book that's made, put a stamp on it if it's clean, and then not if it's not, and you can only sell comic books if it's got the thing on it. And it didn't work out. I think what happened was the regulators were not the artists, so they stamped out these horror comics and these other stories, and there was no replacement value. So the comics fell apart. It lost its viability as an industry. Got a lot of reprints and loose attempts to do westerns and romance stuff, and it took another, about a decade, maybe a little less, to get to this Marvel Comics boom and the DC Comics booming back also, and making superhero comics the replacement thing. But that wasn't there at the time. So comics companies committed suicide and very, very nearly succeeded in destroying everything on account of one crazy person masquerading as a moral authority. Actual history. Yes. And finally, number one, it's like the unofficial mascot of the show because I love talking about it. The end of the Justice League of America, aka Justice League in the 80s, aka Justice League Detroit. So I think I've told this, I did tell this before, comic book fan, you think of the Justice League of America, you're like, that's perfect. That's iconic. I don't even think their comics in the 60s were that great, but the concept is so strong. You got everyone's favorite, most iconic heroes ever on a team together. Bada boom, bada bing. You got Superman, Batman, Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, eventually Green Arrow, Hawkman, Hawkgirl. You get the point. And it's like, they go on adventures together, and it's like, I want to see them go on adventures together. So it's like, this was going great. But then, the DC editorial panicked because there was a stagnation in readership in the 70s into the 80s. And instead of being like, we got this concept that used to work, so we know it can work, so we can fix it and make it work again, pull some ideas, they're like, no, we need to take this in a whole new direction. So they got rid of a lot of Justice League members. I don't know the specifics. Who has read the Justice League Detroit comic in the comments? Please correct me. But they got rid of a lot of the bigwigs. They brought in some young superheroes who had no previous history because they're like, young people are not reading Justice League. You know what young people need? Random young people. That's how it works. That's how it works. I'm thinking of a movie I want to watch this weekend, and I see, I never heard of that movie, or the director, or the story seems kind of boring, but they've got a 35-year-old guy in it. I'm going to go watch. And lo and behold, the random young people crap was a panicky move that did not work. There was a panic in Detroit. I feel like that's a song. Let me know in the comments. Give me a few. Help me a few bars. So the comic got canceled. It bottomed out. They literally killed the Justice League. Lex Luthor couldn't do it. The Joker couldn't do it. The generic hoods from most of the issues couldn't do it. Starro could not do it. Anyway, and they had to reboot it in the mid-'80s. It's called Justice League, No America. I've talked about this before too. It's Keith Giffen's sort of more modern, globalistic, quasi-humorous modern take on it, which is very successful and brought it back, but they killed it. You killed a team where Superman was an ancillary member. DC Comics is the most successful supervillain of all time. Gorilla Grodd couldn't do it. The Hellfire Club and some kind of Marvel DC crossover couldn't do it. On that note, this has been Jason Luna's take. Jason's Luna-tic take on comic books tick. Second tick is silent. A lot of repetition today, so I'm gonna work on that. But finally, I'll just leave you with this. Hypnotized Gardner couldn't do it. You know what I'm telling you? The Black Adam couldn't do it. Black Adam couldn't do shit. But DC Comics did. Good night, everyone.